Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, July the 31st, 2025. Today, Venus moves into Cancer. In fact, Venus might have moved into Cancer last night if you're in the Americas. And, this is a relatively big event. Venus is crossing, the solstice point, 0 degrees Cancer, and it's of course a sign change, and it's likely to have an impact on us, and it's something that I think I need to look at, in detail. Not just because Venus is in a new sign. What does it mean when Venus is on a cardinal, on a solstice point, in fact, and additionally, it's starting to make a square aspect to Saturn and Neptune. And so, Venus in Cancer, I do feel quite strongly about Venus in Cancer because I've got Venus in Cancer myself. Maybe I'll look at my own chart as well, very briefly. I don't want to obsess about myself, to give you some of my ideas about what Venus in Cancer, might mean. But before we look at this placement, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, July the 31st, last day of July. And so here is the chart for today, set for New York at noon. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. As far as the thumbnail is concerned, we've got Donald Trump, we've got Barack Obama, and we've got the Emperor Caligula. What have they all got in common? Well, they've all got Venus in Cancer. So here's the chart. So what's the first thing to notice? At noon, the moon is in late Libra, New York time. So today is a changeover day. And when Venus is in Libra, when the moon is in Libra, it's in mutual reception to Venus. So we've got a Moon-Venus mutual reception, over the course of the day, which, all things being equal, is something to welcome. The moon might be in the Via Combusta, getting ready to move into Scorpio, but on the other hand, it is strengthened with that reception. So that might mean that we can get on relatively well with other people, and things might be flowing sort of more than usual. Though we shouldn't forget that the moon is getting ready to move into Scorpio, and of course, the moment the moon moves into Scorpio, it's no longer in mutual reception with Venus. And as far as the moon's movement into Scorpio, that takes place London time at 25 minutes past 6 in the evening. So, early evening in Europe, Africa, is when moon enters Scorpio. And, if you're in the Americas, early afternoon, approximately, it could actually be late morning if you're in California or British Columbia or Oregon, and sort of even earlier if you're in Hawaii or Alaska. So the day potentially has two sections, the moon in Libra section and the moon in Scorpio part. And, as far as Venus in Cancer is concerned, so when Venus moves into Cancer, you could say that it strengthens. It moves into the first decanate of Cancer, the first 10 degrees of the sign, which is ruled by itself. Venus rules the first decanate of Cancer, certainly using the system of rulership that employed by William Lilly. And so that might be good. On the other hand, when Venus moves into Cancer, it starts to make a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. And that square is potentially troubling. We're probably going to be feeling it today. Tomorrow is when it's exact, and you can imagine, Venus square Saturn can be a difficult aspect, and it's not the most emotionally flowing aspect in the world. And so, it's great that the Moon and Venus are in mutual reception. And perhaps while the Moon and Venus are in mutual reception, that kind of holds off the Venus square Saturn energy. But then when the Moon moves into Scorpio, whenever that might be when we have to sort of confront the fact that Venus's position temporally isn't so great. So as far as relationships and getting on with people are concerned, it's a bit of a mixed blessing. And arguably, as the day progresses, as you get into tomorrow, things might not be so good. Additionally, we're starting to see a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, and I think that Sun-Mercury conjunction becomes exact this evening if you're in the Americas. So as far as when it actually happens, so the exact conjunction, early evening, approximately. In the Americas is when the Sun and Mercury come together, and there's always issues about how you treat a Sun-Mercury conjunction. Is Mercury strengthened by that exact conjunction? Is it a Cazimi conjunction? I'm of the view that probably not. Mercury's condition is now looking pretty bad, and Mercury is retrograde, and it's conjunct the Sun, and Mercury is in Leo. Leo is not a sign where Mercury is formally in its detriment or in its fall, but I always feel that Mercury is not the best place. Leo is not the best place for Mercury to be in, and so that this Sun conjunct Mercury can undermine our objectivity, and we might reach conclusions which are based on false information, or our own ego can just get in the way of things, because that's a strong Sun in Leo, and it could just completely undermine Mercury, and it may be very difficult to think straight. So those are some thoughts about the positions of the planets centered around New York. If you look at the position for Noon in Sydney as a representative of Australia and New Zealand, the Moon is at 22 degrees 21 Libra at noon in Sydney, so you're not going to see any Moon in Scorpio if you're in Australasia. Moon in Scorpio is about tomorrow, and so the Moon is last degrees of Libra. It's not going anywhere. It's void of course. It's made its last major aspect to a major planet before leaving the sign, and so if you are in Australasia, it may feel that not a great deal is happening, that you're kind of waiting for something to change, and you might start something off, but are you actually going to be able to see it through to a conclusion? Maybe not. So don't be disappointed if you can't get everything done today. It may take a bit more time than expected. And then there is the heliocentric view. Here are the planets with the Sun at the center of the solar system, and we have just noticed geocentrically that the Sun and Mercury are getting very close to one another, and we see the same thing heliocentrically. The Earth and Mercury are getting close to one another, and it's all about the way we use words, isn't it? So if we say the Sun is conjunct Mercury, that makes us feel that Mercury is getting overwhelmed. It's getting burnt out. It's combust. But if we use different language and we say, well, the Earth is conjunct Mercury from the Sun's perspective, well, that means we can put a completely different spin on that. I mean, Mercury conjunct Earth. People have got lots to say, and we might not always get our facts right, but there is certainly a lot to talk about, and and a lot to communicate. And so, maybe there's a silver lining, and maybe it is all about perspective. And there is a subjectivity to astrology. I mean, you could argue that astrology is all about words, that astrology is just a language that's to help us explain things. And it can, very much sort of depend on our viewpoint. Now, heliocentrically, we do get a sign change. We get Venus moving into Taurus. So geocentrically, Venus is moving into Cancer. Heliocentrically, it's moving into Taurus. I don't know if that really means much, heliocentrically, the heliocentric signs. Yes, some people say, but when you've got a sign change, that can, have an influence on, for example, the markets. I think I've noticed astrologers financial astrologers, of course, financial astrologers often use heliocentric astrology. They do get excited about heliocentric sign changes, and they might see this as being representing a change in the markets. And I think that there is stuff going on in the markets. I think that early August does look problematic. And I think I probably need to do a video on that, sooner rather than later, because we've got this big build-up coming up in just over a week's time. We've got this full moon, we've got Mercury going stationary direct, we've got Mars opposition Saturn. There are things we really need to take notice of, very soon. But the thing I want to say about Venus moving into Taurus is that when Venus moves into Taurus, it makes a semi-sextile to Neptune, and it makes a square to Pluto. So you've got Venus square Pluto. So Venus square Pluto is happening at the same time as geocentrically the moon is moving into Scorpio. So you could say that there is a certain intensity there. Could be about relationships. Relationships not just between people, but organizations, countries, politicians, and people are trying to hold on to each other tightly, or they're getting obsessed. And so that may say something about what's going on. Also, money. Venus is a universal significator of money. So who has the money? Who doesn't have the money? And so heliocentrically, that Venus square Pluto is something to watch. And now I want to switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, July the 31st, 2025. Aries. It's a day of flux. You might think that things are moving in one direction, and then they end up going somewhere else. And so it's difficult, Aries, to know exactly what you want to focus on. To begin with, you might be of the opinion that you should be thinking about other people and other people's interests. I mean, even if you couldn't care less about other people, you know that they are important. But when it comes to actually seeing something happen, you have expectations. You expect people to do something, say something, and you might then be disappointed or relieved. So if you do find yourself waiting for another person to do something, then you might be waiting forever. Well, not waiting forever, but in the short term, you don't hold your breath. And so perhaps, Aries, you should be thinking ahead. You've only got a limited amount of time. You don't want to be at another person's beck and call, and you've got your own life to lead. And so do plan ahead. Think about what is your next move going to be. And at a certain stage, the moon changes sign. Moon moves into Scorpio, and so when the moon moves into Scorpio, whenever that might be, it'll be sort of late morning, early afternoon if you're in the Americas, early evening in Europe or Africa, when the moon moves into Scorpio, you might find that things do become sort of more intense and more serious, and it's more about you rather than other people. And so it is perhaps a good time to look after your own interests. And okay, that's not a typically Aryan view, but it might be the best approach, especially as we got Venus moving into Cancer. And Venus moving into Cancer, as far as you're concerned, is quite an important event. I mean, Venus is a universal significator of people, relationships. It's also about your comfort and your security. And so, with Venus in Cancer, some Aryans may feel that they don't want to be out and about. They don't want to be sticking a neck out. You want to enjoy what you have and be comfortable doing it. Now, Venus does make a square to Saturn, and that's Venus square Saturn. Not exact until tomorrow, but I think you're going to feel it. And remember, Saturn is moving through your sign. And so with Venus square Saturn, that could be about your approach and how you occur to other people. And it might be that you come over as someone who is quite difficult and quite structured in your own way. I mean, I know that the word structure and Aries are not two things you normally make an association, but you are someone on a positive note who commands respect, who needs to be treated with a degree of caution, and that is a good thing up to a point. Now, there's some danger that Venus square Saturn, represents another person, maybe someone who is temporarily weaker than you, or maybe they're even in awe of you, and they just don't know how to deal with you. They don't know what to say, and they're close at hand. But you shouldn't read too much into another person's silence. And if someone does say nothing, that doesn't mean they're not thinking anything. And while you might be inclined to retreat into your own world, to be thinking about your own priorities, give other people a chance. You don't have to give them a huge chance, but just give people a chance to say what's on their mind, and just in general to be themselves, and also consider what it means to be in authority. If you are in any position of authority, then you have to ask yourself, whether that's actually helpful. It may not be helpful. It's possible that the authority you have kind of gets stagnant. Yes, you know what you're doing. You know about your power, but power on its own doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it's just it's something that you have. But if you use power without thought, then that may not be such a good thing. In fact, in a worst case scenario, some Aryans might use any power they have to maintain the status quo, because they don't want change. Now, that doesn't sound a typically Aries state of affairs, but today that might be something you experience. So if you are in a position where you are exerting power, ask yourself why, and ask yourself what you are trying to achieve. Taurus. Venus is changing sign, and it's moving into Cancer. And this is an event that matters. After all, Venus is your ruler, and so you need to be prepared for this change. I mean, Venus stays in Cancer. How long does Venus stay in Cancer for? It stays in Cancer until around the 25th, 26th of August. So nearly sort of 4 weeks. And in general, Cancer is is a good sign for Venus to be in. It should give you a boost. And the first 10 degrees of Cancer, the first decanate of Cancer, sometimes called the face, is ruled by Venus itself. So Venus does have dignity in Cancer, and additionally, Venus is moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter. So that does indicate that with Venus moving into Cancer, you are in a generally better position. Venus in late Gemini was not really going anywhere. It had very much had its day. You might have felt that things were getting stagnant, and having this sign change, it does give you new opportunities, and it allows you to utilize your sensitivity and your emotions, and because Cancer, Venus in Cancer, Cancer is an emotional sign. It can be too emotional sometimes, but Venus in Cancer, just does allow you to to be yourself, to say what's on your mind, and you can move from one place to another with relative ease. You don't have to make a big fuss about it. So that's all good. On the other hand, when Venus moves into Cancer, it does straight away start making square aspects to Saturn and Neptune. And I'll probably be talking in greater detail about those squares between Saturn and Neptune tomorrow, because tomorrow, Friday, is when those squares become exact. But it's still pretty exact at the moment. And so the way you first feel about Venus in Cancer may not be great. You might suddenly find that you can't do things, or it appears that you can't do things, or that something is blocking you, or these fears sort of come out of the woodwork, old fears maybe, and you're worried about whether or not you can really take action. What would happen, and you may be tempted to concentrate on the negative. Now this square between Venus and Saturn and Neptune is short-lived. Venus is moving relatively quickly, and by the weekend, this Saturn Neptune square will be starting to recede, and so don't take your conclusions too seriously. So as you move end of July into August, your first impressions might be quite negative, and it might just feel that you're stuck. And don't take that to heart. It's just temporary. When Venus gets going, when it moves towards the conjunction of conjunction to Jupiter, things will really start to move. Now, aside from that, looking at how you relate to other people as they are, what they'd really like, not how you imagine them to be, because I think some of your impressions are pretty negative at the moment. But as far as what people are really like, the reality of the situation is that everyone's fine. Everyone is on your side. Most people are on your side, and you can certainly gain a great deal from interaction with other people. It may just be short, brief interactions, lasting minutes, even seconds, but there is a general feeling that that things are working out. And that's the reality of the situation, and if you make the effort, you can make favorable contacts. And so it's important not to be shy, and don't forget that at the beginning of the day, well, maybe all day long if you're in Australasia, the moon is in mutual reception to Venus. So moon is in Libra, sign ruled by Venus. Venus is in Cancer, ruled by the moon, and so that really does help you out. And so don't get caught by your own fears and probably incorrect perceptions. The objective atmosphere is good, and so it is important that you're able to to take advantage of it. Now, the moon does move into Scorpio at some stage. Okay, that might be this evening if you're in Europe. It could be tomorrow if you're in Australia. It'll be much earlier in the day in the Americas. When the moon moves into Scorpio, that's an important event for the average Taurus, because Scorpio is your opposite sign, and with the moon when the moon moves into Scorpio, now that sounds a problem because the moon has fallen in Scorpio, but the moon makes a trine to Venus, and so moon moving into Scorpio may say something about relationships, even close relationships, and things can work very well for you. It's quite intense, the moon moving into Scorpio. It's quite emotional, obviously, because the moon is moving into a water sign, but you can handle it. And of course, the moon moving into Scorpio, first he makes a trine to Venus, then it moves on and it makes a trine to Jupiter, and so if you go with it, you can start really sort of benefiting from that aspect, and relationships can flourish, and there can be good communication, not just on a mental level but on an emotional level as well. So it may be that you have a chance to get close to people and to enjoy other people's company, and if some of your relationships had felt they were going nowhere recently, then you may have a chance to to get things back on the road. Gemini. The moon is in a rather I won't say unstable position, but it's kind of not neither one thing nor the other. It's getting ready to move out of Libra and move into Scorpio, and it's not doing a huge amount in Libra. In fact, it's void of course in Libra, and so with the moon being void of course for much of the day, it's possible that you feel that not a great deal is happening. I mean, you'd like things to be happening, and you have ideas, and you'd like to enjoy yourself, but things just aren't there. And yet that would especially be the case if you are relying on other people. You want to be amused or entertained. I don't think that's going to happen. So it does mean that you're going to have to make it happen yourself. And it may even be the case that you thought you had support in one area, and the support has evaporated. Someone may no longer be there. It may not be about their physical presence. It just might be their priorities. Their priorities have changed, and your interests may not be as important as they used to be. And that is a feature, perhaps, of Venus moving out of Gemini. Venus, I'm afraid, is no longer in your sign. It's gone somewhere else. And so that may sort of literally say something about another person's focus. And Gemini, it's probably important that you don't try too hard to make sense of whatever is going on. And I say that because of Mercury. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury's position, to be frank, isn't great. It's retrograde. You already knew that Mercury was retrograde, but it's getting very close to the Sun, and with the Mercury getting so close to the Sun, it's combust, and you might feel almost sort of blinded by the Sun. You're too close. The light is too bright, and Gemini, it might be difficult for you to work out which way to move. I mean, you can try. I mean, you've certainly got ideas, and you've got an ego, but sometimes your own ego can trip you up. And so, Gemini, this is a time where you do have to tread carefully, and this applies not just today but into tomorrow. In fact, tomorrow even more so. Now, some might say that Mercury benefits from a conjunction to the Sun because it's a cazimi conjunction. Supposedly, when the Sun is right on that conjunction, you're on the same wavelength as the Sun, and therefore you can't be hurt by it. I mean, I think that's one way of looking at it, but I don't buy that really. It's just too close. Though you can try, you can see what happens. If you're in the Americas, for example, this evening the Sun and Mercury are exactly conjunct, and so maybe there'll be a moment of clarity. You can put the cazimi effect to the test. So there may be a moment of clarity this evening, where you go into something and it's all sort of completely chaotic. Things are breaking down. Things are going all over the place. You can't see straight, and then suddenly there may be a moment where everything comes into focus, and that is your answer. And how long does that focus last for? Probably not very long. But that's just as the Sun and Mercury, are exactly conjunct one another, and then Mercury keeps moving retrograde, and the chaos returns. But hopefully you've remembered what you've seen, and you've had the key realization. Now, if we're talking about Sun conjunct Mercury, it's also Earth conjunct Mercury. So, as I said in the introduction, when I was looking at the general planetary picture, words do matter. And as a Gemini, you of all people know that words matter. And if we cast this aspect as a heliocentric aspect, Earth conjunct Mercury, well, that sounds much better, doesn't it? And so it may be a good time, Gemini, to be thinking about the world, the Earth, to be having thoughts. Don't necessarily draw any conclusions, but the ideas will be coming thick and fast, and it's possible that you may be able to gain from these ideas. Now, going back to Venus being in Cancer. Now, on one hand, Venus moving into Cancer is a disappointment because you were used to Venus moving into your own sign. But, nothing lasts forever. Of course, I've got my Sun in Gemini, so it refers to me as well as you. But with the Venus moving into Gemini, moving out of Gemini into Cancer, the question then is, okay, Venus was in Gemini. You might have had lots of ideas. The Gemini season is now absolutely well and truly over. What have you learnt? How are you going to put things into action? Do you have sufficient resources? And that might be a question with Venus in Cancer. Venus in Cancer is asking you, okay, you've got these ideas, you've got these plans, there are things you wanted to do, but what about being able to pay for them, for example? Can you pay for them? And when Venus moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Saturn, and so some Geminis may be feeling some financial insecurity. Things might not be quite as easy as you thought they were. It just occurs to you that it's not as sorted out as it looks. Is that a bad thing? I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think that it's great that you're seeing things as they are. And we've got Venus about to make a square to Saturn, and so Venus square Saturn could be about financial discomfort. But Venus does keep moving, and so Venus is not going to be square Saturn forever. In fact, Venus is going to soon enough be conjunct Jupiter, and that Venus conjunct Jupiter is financially should be potentially something to look forward to. I mean, it's not an aspect that's immediately going to take place, but I will be talking about it closer to the time. And so if you do have worries about money, Gemini, all that's happening is you're seeing things for what they really are. And I think that you should be kind of happy that you're worrying about money, because you're worrying about money at a sufficiently early stage to be able to do something about it. Cancer. The moon is kind of neither in one sign nor the other. Well, obviously it's always in one sign, but it's a very mixed day. The moon could be in Libra, it could be in Scorpio. It depends where you are, depends what time it is, and so Cancer, I think that regardless of what sign the moon is in, whether it is in Libra, whether it is in Scorpio, in both cases it works well for you. So that shouldn't bother you. And the day starts off with the moon in Libra, and moon in Libra is in mutual reception to Venus in Cancer. So that is something that you should really be quite happy about. Things are working. You can be really as happy as a clam, maybe, as they say. I don't think I've ever used that phrase before, happy as a clam. You can be as happy as a clam, and you can just settle down, wherever you want to settle, and you can sort of benefit from that Venus energy. Remember, Venus is now in your sign, and it stays in your sign until the end of August, and so Venus is a benefic, moving into your sign. It's a planet of relationships. It's a planet of money. It's great, and so with the moon in Libra, hopefully you realize that things are changing, and that things are changing for the better. And this could be a time where you may be very fortunate, especially with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer. Do make the most of it, though it's not there yet. You haven't missed it. But you could say the moment Venus moves into Cancer, that Venus-Jupiter conjunction becomes operational. Certainly if you look at your chart from a whole sign perspective, so it becomes operational, and so you become lucky. And at first with the moon in Libra, you don't necessarily have to do anything. You might just feel that things are going your way, and there just may be a quiet satisfaction that this really is happening. And so there is a lot to look forward to. And then the moon changes sign at some stage. That might be this morning if you're in, I don't know, if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska. It could be not until tomorrow if you're in Australasia. That does depend. That's why it's a day that is somewhat split. But moon moving into Scorpio, might sound a bit of a problem. Moon moves into Scorpio. It's a heavy-duty sign, and when it moves into Scorpio, it makes a square to Pluto, and so that might be of concern. Also, moon in Scorpio. Well, 3 degrees Scorpio is the point of maximum fall for the moon in the western, well, both east and west, but obviously that Scorpio in the eastern chart is in a different place than in the west. But the thing about the moon moving into Scorpio is that when the moon moves into Scorpio, it's a water sign. You're a water sign, and the moon in Scorpio makes a trine to Venus. So that moon trine Venus, which you're going to feel, okay, it might be later in the day, but the moon is certainly getting there, and that's going to really make things work for you. You'll feel that that things are moving, and it is a reminder that Venus has changed sign, and your ability to get on with people and to enjoy other people's company is going to be really good. And so this is the first evidence for you that Venus really has changed sign, that Venus really is in your own sign. So perhaps you can start to use it, and you'll notice that people are responding to you. The world is responding to you, and they're responding to you in a way that is very sort of very, very positive, and you can start thinking about how things are improving in general, and specifically with the moon moving into Scorpio Cancer, it's important that you do things which are real and authentic. Yeah, authenticity absolutely matters. There's so much inauthenticity around us, but you don't have to follow the crowd. It's all about what matters to you. It's not what matters to anyone else. And if you can be authentic and enjoy yourself in ways that are authentic, you're not enjoying yourself out of show. You do something that seems to be fun. You're not really enjoying yourself, but you pretend it's fun. For whatever bizarre reason, maybe it's status or impression management or whatever. It's what is real for you and what really does matter to you. And if you enjoy it, then go for it. Of course, it's got to be wholesome and healthy as well. But I don't think that should be a problem. And additionally, Moon trine Venus, we have to say, from a relationship viewpoint, that's great, isn't it? I mean, what can be better? So, the right relationships can really work for you today. Leo, the moon is getting ready to move into Scorpio. Quite when the moon moves into Scorpio depends. But when the moon does move into Scorpio, whether it's later in the day, it could be into tomorrow. That may be a time when you feel that you need to slow down, not forever, just for a few days as you move into the weekend. There may not be so many things that you need to do or want to do, and you perhaps have other priorities that you need to consider. You don't have to be around sort of all the time. So that's something to be thinking about. And additionally, we've got the moon, when it moves into Scorpio, it does make a trine to Venus, and of course Venus has just changed sign. Venus has gone into Cancer, and we've now got Venus and Jupiter in Cancer. So Venus and Jupiter are the two benefics. Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is the lesser benefic, both in Cancer, both therefore in a sign which, from a Leo viewpoint, is perhaps rather hidden. It's quite introspective. You're keeping some things to yourself, and that may also say something about where the luck is. If you take the view that Venus and Jupiter are the planets of luck, and they're in a fairly sort of introspective sector of your chart, then that might mean that if you want to be lucky, you can't be lucky if you're on center stage. That's not where the luck is to be found. The luck can be found somewhere that is quite private. It's in your own world, and you need to work at it. In your own way, and it might take some time to develop. Remember, Venus has just gone into Cancer, and it stays in Cancer until the end of August. Of course, at the end of August, Venus moves into Leo. So just after the Sun changes sign, just after the Sun moves out of Leo, you get Venus coming into Leo. So the Leo season is quite prolonged and sort of actually moves through, if you consider Mercury as well, continues through until well into September. And so, just Leo, just don't feel that you have to, be doing everything, and don't feel that you have to be in the center of things, and don't take anything to heart. Don't take what people do to heart. I mean, the moon is starting to make a square to Pluto, and so with moon square Pluto, there might be times when you take other people too seriously. You over exaggerate. You exaggerate their influence. So that's something that you have to be aware of, and don't exaggerate your own influence either. And remember, the sun is in Leo, and so that's great. And so, with the sun in your own sign, whatever's going on, you have a certain amount of power. But as far as exaggerating it, the sun is making a conjunction to Mercury. And this conjunction to Mercury is, well, it could be exact this evening if you're in the Americas, so it's certainly going to be exact tomorrow. And this conjunction between the sun and Mercury could be about you preventing another person from speaking. It's not that you just tell them to shut up or anything. It's just something about the way you present yourself, your ego, the kind of vibes you're giving off, that it just doesn't feel like the appropriate right time to bring something up. And that might be a shame. So do make sure, Leo, that everyone has their say today and tomorrow, and probably into the weekend as well. And additionally, it's not just about what people say. It's about ideas, and it's about alternative views. So if you are very sure of yourself, as you might be with the sun moving through Leo, and alternative ideas crop up, perhaps in your own head, you read something. You might read something or hear something that just contradicts your own view, and the temptation would be, with this Sun Mercury conjunction, just to ignore it. You've made up your mind. You're not going to stop. But I would suggest that if you hear something that questions your plans, that seems to contradict you, do stop. Do listen. It might not be such a bad idea. You might not just learn something, but you might, in certain situations, prevent yourself from making a mistake. Virgo. It can't be denied that the sun is starting to make a conjunction to Mercury. It's combust. I mean, it's not just starting, the combustion is really with us. Tomorrow, Friday, the sun and Mercury will be combust. And, I hate to say this, but Mercury is not in a good position. And Virgo, that does matter for you. Mercury is your ruler. So, Mercury is very close to the sun. And Mercury is retrograde. And Mercury's in Leo. Now you could say, well, so what? Mercury's in Leo. I'm just not convinced that Leo is the best sign for Mercury to be in. Mercury is a planet that needs some flexibility. It needs to be able to navigate from one idea to another. Leo is quite an opinionated sign. It's a fixed sign. And I'm not convinced that Mercury has got enough room to move. It's a bit of a straitjacket for poor Mercury. And so, Virgo, do try to be aware of this, and don't reach conclusions, and don't. One conclusion you should not come to is the concept that you might be 100% in the right. You may not be in the right, but still, you may be quite sure that you've worked it all out, and you may not be telling everyone that you've got it all sorted out, but privately, this might be what you believe. And so, do think, Virgo, about your beliefs, and and what conclusions you're coming to. Because if you find yourself making rapid conclusions at the moment, then it may be too rapid. It may just be the case, Virgo, that you want a resolution. That's something that we all want. We want a resolution. We want to end the complications. And so it's just best to just make our mind up, sign on a dotted line, then we don't have to worry about it anymore. But I would not recommend that course of action. And you really should be considering the possibility that you have got something wrong, and that you can't necessarily see the wood for the trees. And so be very, very careful about reaching conclusions, because I don't think that would necessarily work out for you. And this could apply, this could have an impact in many different areas. That could include your work. So if you have a job or if you have a career, we've got Uranus moving through Gemini, and so this is a time, Virgo, when you potentially do have big ideas, when you want to create change, and you may have reached the conclusion that that change has got to come about now, and you may have you've decided on a course of action that relates to your work, and you're ready to go with it. But I'm just not convinced, and if you're being told anything, well, anything in general, but particularly things relating to sort of work and business, if you're being told anything and it sounds convincing, don't be convinced. You have a strong ego at the moment, but you can still be undermined by false information. It is absolutely possible. So those are some negative thoughts about today. It's always good to have a few negative thoughts. On a different note, Venus is moving into Cancer. So Venus has been moving through Gemini for some time. I think that hopefully has been important and useful for Venus to be in Gemini. It's allowed you to sort of think about what you want to achieve, to sort of realign your sense of your overall direction, hopefully with other people's help as well. And then Venus moving into Cancer. Venus does move into Cancer, stay in Cancer for some time until the end of August, and so with Venus into Cancer, it might say something about you and other people. And I don't know how important your social life is to you, but if your social life does matter, Venus moving through Cancer could be a real plus, even if at first sight it doesn't seem like it, because the problem is that when Venus moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Saturn. And so with Venus square Saturn, your first thoughts might be that you and other people just are not on the same wavelength. But that's just temporary. Venus passes through that square to Saturn, and then it moves towards a conjunction to Jupiter. It's a great conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. And so with the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, you can very much enjoy other people's company. And while enjoying other people's company, you can sort of get some insights about yourself and where you are going. It's not just about ambition and the quest for status and recognition. It's about something more existential from that. What are you here for? What would you like to happen? What kind of existence do you envision for yourself? And with Venus moving through Cancer, starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, that vision, I think, is going to be becoming increasingly clear. So you should certainly welcome Venus moving into Cancer, and don't be worried if short term there are a few issues and a few sort of negativities regarding other people. It's just a passing phase, and once you really get into Venus moving into Cancer, it should really work out for you. Libra. Well, I was just talking to Virgo, and I was talking about how wonderful it was that Venus was moving into Cancer, and I have to say the same thing to you. I mean, even more so. Venus is your ruler, and it's changing sign, and it's not changing. It's in Cancer, and so Venus is your ruler. It's so when we're doing your readings for your sign, we really have to track Venus. We have to see what Venus is doing, and Venus has been in late Gemini. And, that's been fine. I hope that you benefited from Venus being in Gemini. It should have stirred up your ideas, hopefully made you more aware of what is possible. But now that Venus is changing sign, moving into Cancer, you could say that the work has started. Cancer is an angular house in the Libran chart. It's high-profile house as well, high-profile sign, and so with Venus moving into Cancer, it's perhaps a time to be recognised and to make sure that you are noticed, and you don't want to be too shy, because you've definitely got something to offer and something to contribute, though it might not seem like it to begin with, because when the Venus moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Saturn and square to Neptune, right at the beginning of the sign. So today, tomorrow, into the weekend, you might feel that you've got a lot to offer, a lot to contribute, but there's something holding you back, and you can't do the things you want to do. What's holding you back? It could be other people, or it could be your perceptions of other people. You may exaggerate another person's strength, and so that might hold you up a bit, but not very much. Venus will move beyond that square to Saturn, and then it will soon enough make a conjunction to Jupiter. So that this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, let me just tell you when that happens. It's approximately going to be, I make it, 11th, 12th of August. So, not long to wait, less than a fortnight. And so that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is really going to work for you. But even before the conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, Venus moving into Cancer, is a time where you need to, really start to align yourself with your ambitions and your hopes for the future, and you will know how to behave. It's not necessarily a time for holding things back. So if you have got any ideas or plans, regarding work, career, business, your ambitions for the future, now is the time to get going on them. I know that it's August, or nearly August. It's the summer. People are supposed, it's the summer in the Northern Hemisphere at least. But, if you were to just do nothing in August, if you, for example, decided to go for a prolonged holiday in August, you could say that would be a shame. That would be a waste. So, if you've got a holiday planned in August, then you think, well, what are you going to do? You don't have to literally be working to benefit from Venus in Cancer. You can be thinking about where you're going, what your next state, what your next step is. And okay, Venus might be out of Cancer by the end of August, but Jupiter's going to stay in Cancer until when? Until I think it's June of next year. So you've got plenty of Jupiter in Cancer, and that will see you through. Don't worry, but do try to make the most of the next few weeks, because you do have a chance. Particularly with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And yes, I will be talking about that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. When closer to the time, when that aspect is about to be exact. And as far as today is concerned, we do have the moon moving through two different signs. The moon starts a day in Libra and then it ends a day in Scorpio. Well, okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is in Libra all day long. And the thing about moon in Libra is that it is in mutual reception to Venus. So do take advantage of it. I think that it can be a great day. Now, if you're in the Americas, that Moon Venus mutual reception is not going to last forever, because the moon will eventually go into Scorpio. I mean, the moon goes into Scorpio sort of early afternoon or even late morning. So if you're in the Americas and you want to make the most of that mutual reception between the moon and Venus, if you want to use that mutual reception, then you need to get going as early as possible. It's great. Moon in Libra, Venus in Cancer. Do take advantage of it. I mean, that does matter. Now, if you're in Europe or Australia, then you've got all day to take advantage of that Moon Venus mutual reception, and that Moon Venus mutual reception, it's going to make you easygoing. You're going to give the impression of being easygoing, a relaxed person to be with, and at the same time you can gently push your agenda. You don't have to assume a big fight, big battle. You can just quietly move forward with whatever you want to move forward with, and you can canvass other people's support. It really shouldn't be a problem. And also today your ability to get on with people is really very good, and you can really benefit from everyone you meet. And in most cases, people are going to want to help. And if you've got requests, I think that there's a good chance that these requests will be answered. So today, you really should make the most of things. And if you are in the Americas, then the moon does eventually move into Scorpio. So by this afternoon, the moon moves into Scorpio. But I don't think that's a problem either, because the moon moving into Scorpio, okay, the moon and Venus won't be in mutual reception anymore, but the moon will be making a trine to Venus, and that moon trine Venus allows you to be quite focused on what you want, and what you want perhaps in a financial sense. And if there's something you want to do financially, you want to do something to enrich yourself or persuade someone that you're worth more money than you're currently getting, then you've got a good chance of being successful. Though don't be in too much of a hurry. Remember, Venus is making a square to Saturn, and I'll be talking about that square to Saturn in more detail when I do your horoscope for Friday. Scorpio, Venus is changing sign. Venus is now in Cancer. So it's moved out of Gemini, where it's been for the last few weeks, and it's now in a water sign. And so from a Scorpio perspective, that's good news, isn't it? I mean, so Venus in Cancer is kind of making a trine aspect to your sign, and so make sure that you realign yourself, because with Venus in Gemini, has had been in Gemini for some time, and you could have just been holding something back, especially as far as other people are concerned, or it might have been the case that other people were holding something back. Something was not being revealed, or someone was dragging your feet. Yeah, it could have been you dragging your feet, could have been another person. With Venus in Gemini, things were just a little too intense at various levels. But now that Venus is moving into Cancer, things do get easier. There's more scope for exploration and for action. And if you look at other people, particularly the people that are important to you, you may notice that they're more open-minded. they may be happier to deal with different subjects, perhaps to explore and to maybe move outside their comfort zone. So that's good news. With Venus moving into Cancer, and Venus does stay in Cancer till the end of August. And so do make the most of that. Now, as far as the moon is concerned, it starts the day in Libra, and it ends the day in Scorpio, unless you're in Australasia, in which case the moon won't move into Scorpio until tomorrow. But with the moon moving into Scorpio, obviously that's good news, isn't it? I mean, the moon does start making a square to Pluto when it moves to Scorpio, but it also makes a trine to Venus. So having the moon in your sign making a trine to Venus, or even just applying to a trine to Venus, that's a very pleasant aspect. So that's something to look forward to. Well, this evening, if you're in Europe or Africa, or maybe as early as the late morning if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska. So it depends where you are, but that moon moving into Scorpio trine Venus is something that sorry about that. So the moon changing sign, going into Scorpio, as far as I can see, it does work in your favour, but at the same time, you are going to have authority. I mean, it is a time, Scorpio, when you do have authority. I mean, we already know that the Sun and Mercury are in Leo. That's a very authoritative position for the Sun and Mercury. I'll be talking about the Sun and Mercury in a moment. But so that does make you an authority figure, a person that people will listen to. But that's good. But up to a point, there is some danger, Scorpio. Particularly if you are in a position where you have power, that you use that power in the wrong way. I mean, you're not being a bully, you're not being a tyrant, but there's some danger that you might try to use your power to maintain the status quo. And if you are a Scorpio, the status quo can be important to you. You like things to be the way they are, and you don't want change. And change can come from many sources, and that change can come from other people. And it's just possible that you use your own power to try to stop people doing things. You may find yourself saying no quite a lot. Once you start saying no, it'll be easy to say no. By saying no, you can bring people to a halt. But ask yourself, why? Why don't you want things to change? When things actually are in a process of change, Jupiter is in Cancer, Venus has moved into Cancer, things are changing, things are looking good, but there just may be part of you, Scorpio, that is holding on to the past and using whatever levers of power you have to hold on to the past. So make sure, Scorpio, that you don't misuse your power, misuse your responsibility. You have a responsible position for a reason, and yes, you can have a real sort of influence on other people, and you can stop them in their tracks. But that would not be the right thing to do. Especially as now is a time when many of the people around you are ready for new challenges. They're ready to move on. They're ready to explore new ideas, new activities. And in most cases, this is something that you should be welcoming, and you should be supporting it, and you should be encouraging it, and you shouldn't regard it as being a threat. Sagittarius. There are some changes going on. Well, there's always change to consider, isn't there? But one thing that we do have to take note of is the fact that Venus is moving out of Gemini. So Venus has been in Gemini for quite some time, and of course, Gemini, from your perspective, is your opposite sign. And so, with Venus moving through Gemini, over the last few weeks, there may have been times when you had to deal with other people, where you had to change your plans because you had to take into account, what people were like, what people they wanted, and it didn't feel too good, perhaps. And don't forget that Uranus has now moved into Gemini as well, so that created an additional complication. I think it was July the 7th that Uranus moved into Gemini, and perhaps you became aware of how much people could influence you in certain situations. They can mess things up for you. But now that Venus is moving out of Gemini, that possibly removes some of the pressure. Other people don't have so much control over you, and you can start to make your own decisions more. I mean, you're always able to make your own decisions, but now you are probably freer, and you can start to explore things in your own way. And Venus, when it moves into Cancer, it is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and this is a reminder of your own power and your own intensity. Cancer is a very sort of intense sign, certainly a very emotional sign, and so with Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, it perhaps allows you to explore another part of who you are without having to worry too much about other people's interference. And so with Venus moving into Cancer, there may be just things that you just really want to get deeply into, and you can be very effective about it. And additionally, if you want to tune into your own power, you can, and you realize that your power has a very deep source. You go into the deep source of your own authority and power, and you just realize what you can do. And you may have sort of examples of your power coming up sort of over the course of the day, when you realize that you can change things, and you can change things perhaps through doing something dramatic, but in many cases it's just willpower, just through the power of your own will and what you're thinking about. You sort of engineer a huge amount of change. And when it comes to other people, I've already mentioned that other people are perhaps not as important as they used to be. You can make your own decisions, but you might still want to be aware that other people can make mistakes. It's not a good time to be listening too hard to what other people are saying. They might have plans. They might sound exciting, but people who sound exciting, who appear to have a lot to offer, may actually be very confused. There may be something that they don't understand, that is just too much for them to deal with, and they're overwhelmed, and they still sound very sure of themselves. Some people are, and there's no reason for them to be so sure of themselves. Maybe there are people out there who are dealing with big concepts that are too big for them, and they're trying to make sense of it, and in the end they're just getting hopelessly confused. So this may say something about some of your relationships. If you know someone and you're close to them, and they sound very convinced that they're in the right, or they have some inspiration and they feel that they've got it all sorted out, then I would be skeptical, because some people are in the process of making a mistake, and your job is to perhaps sort of move them in the right direction. Or if you can't do that, don't allow yourself to get caught up in another person's misunderstanding. Capricorn. Venus is changing sign. It's moving out of Gemini and into Cancer. So, Cancer is your opposite sign. So with Venus moving into this sign, it may have implications for relationships. Cancer represents the other, but perhaps the important people in your life. You've already got Jupiter moving through Cancer, and I don't know how Jupiter in Cancer is working for you at the moment, but with Jupiter in Cancer, it might be that you have higher expectations from other people. For other people, you want more. Maybe existing relationships aren't giving you everything you need, and you want to take things further. So that's one possible interpretation of Jupiter in Cancer. And Jupiter in Cancer can also be about benefiting from other people, benefiting from another person's generosity. So that's a way it can work. And so you could say that with Venus moving into Cancer, it just intensifies, what Jupiter can deliver. And so, while Venus is moving through Cancer, you do make the most of other people, and yes, have high expectations. And Venus in Cancer may represent another person moving into your life. And Venus works relatively well in Cancer. I mean, particularly the first 10 degrees, because Venus rules the first decade of Cancer between 0 Cancer and 10 degrees Cancer. I believe that first decade is ruled by Venus, and so that does give Venus dignity, the dignity that maybe didn't have in late Gemini. And so that might indicate someone who has some dignity, who in one way or another can work in your favor. So don't underestimate other people and how useful they can be. And it's not just about your personal life or your general happiness. It also could relate to your work or your business, if that's relevant. I don't know if you've got a job or if you've got a business. Yeah, Venus moving into Cancer can help. Remember, it's about perhaps benefiting from someone else. So if you want to be more successful than you currently are, then other people can help. Listen to other people, because people have got a lot to offer. And if you're looking for a job, then maybe someone's got an idea or someone's got a contact. You're not on your own, and I think that's something that is very important for Capricorns to recognize at the moment. So, sometimes Capricorns do feel that everything is down to them. It's their responsibility to sort everything out. They can't trust anyone else. If they do trust people, it goes wrong. But you can take that view too far. If you look at the structure of the Capricorn horoscope at the moment, you'll notice that if we put Capricorn as the first house, still most of the planets are on the other side of the chart. They're to the right. And with all those planets to the right, that indicates the other, getting help from other people, getting support from other people. You're at this stage at the moment, just where we are at the moment in this season. So you really don't have to do everything on your own. It's absolutely unnecessary, and you can be lucky. And in order to be lucky, you might have to trust people. Not entirely. no one can be entirely trusted. As a Capricorn, you absolutely recognize that. But with another person's help, you can certainly benefit. Now, it's possible that your first impulse is to put people off. I mean, Venus is making a square to Saturn, and this square between Venus and Saturn is exact tomorrow. There's Venus in Cancer moving to a square of Saturn and to a square of Neptune. So your first impulse over the next couple of days may be to say no. Someone tries to offer you something, someone tries to get close to you, someone is genuinely there to help, but there's just some danger, Capricorn, that you might put them off, or you might just say something to discourage them. Maybe it's something you have to do short term, but Venus is going to stay in Cancer, until the end of August. So, I do hope that you really are, able to make the most of it. Aquarius. Venus is moving into Cancer. That's what I'm telling everyone. Venus is moving into Cancer. I mean, it's a big event of the day. Okay, it might have happened yesterday if you're in the Americas. So what does it mean if Venus moves into Cancer? Well, from an Aquarian perspective, it's possibly a time when you might be inclined to become more sensible. You recognize that there are things that need to be resolved, and you also recognize that it's down to you, that you can't rely on anyone, and if you are relying on other people, you find yourself relying on other people, it has to be done according to a strict, almost protocol. This is the way to do it, and you want things done in a certain way, and that might mean that you are perceived, at least in the short term, as being quite controlling. You can be quite controlling, particularly over the next day or two. Venus is making a square to Saturn, and so you want things done in a particular way. If other people come into your world, you interact with them, then you might be fairly demanding, and you might be too demanding, and there is a danger that certain people don't really want to deal with you because you're difficult. But maybe that's a good thing. You don't want people around you who don't understand you and who don't appreciate you. And additionally, with Venus moving into Cancer, we've also remember Jupiter's in Cancer as well, and that might say something about your attitude to your health and your well-being, and it's a time when you possibly can make a few changes. You should be sort of aligning yourself. Sometimes Aquarians can be too in their heads. It's not just you, Aquarius. I'm a Gemini. Geminis can certainly exist in their heads. Forget the body and the needs of the body. Although probably you could say of the three air signs, Aquarius arguably is the most earthy. But still, you need to understand what is possible, what is not possible. Hopefully you're starting to understand this already with Jupiter being in Cancer. But now that Venus is in Cancer, you have a chance to really work on your body, to align not just your body, but your whole sense of emotional, physical, psychological well-being, and you don't need any stress. And it is perhaps a great opportunity to de-stress your life and to work out what is missing, what experiences are missing. You might say that with Venus and Jupiter in Cancer in a water sign, that you might relate well to water, to spas, to being close to rivers and lakes and the sea. Obviously, you don't want to necessarily go into the water. You don't want to have an accident or a mishap, but you have to realign yourself, and that might be what Venus in Cancer is doing. Okay, at first you might resist this realignment. After all, Venus does make the square to Saturn as it goes into Cancer, but it's only temporary. So there's an opportunity here, certainly over the next few weeks, to just make yourself feel healthier and indeed happier. One other thing, the moon is moving into Scorpio. Could move into Scorpio this morning if you're in the Americas, or at least early afternoon. Might be this evening in Europe and Africa. Could be tomorrow in Australia. But when the moon does move into Scorpio, it makes a trine to Venus. That's one thing, and also the moon in Scorpio, it does make a square to Pluto, and I think that that's something that you should be happy about, because it gives you power and it allows you to just make things happen. You don't have to be involved in some huge life and death struggle. It's not like that. I think that if you start applying yourself and you make it clear, what you want, then I think you're quickly going to find that other people are going to oblige, and so that could be quite useful if you're working over the next couple of days. I think that as you move into the weekend, I think that there's quite a lot that you can accomplish. Pisces, things are probably looking pretty good at the moment, because Venus is moving into Cancer, and Venus is moving into a water sign, and it's more than that, because Venus is starting to move towards a conjunction to Jupiter, and Jupiter is your ruler, and so that Venus Jupiter conjunction is really going to work for you. I mean, it's a very lucky conjunction. Now, we're not quite there yet. I think it's around August the 12th, something like that the Venus Jupiter conjunction is exact. But as Venus moves into Cancer, you're probably going to feel sort of more confident. Okay, not straight away, because when Venus moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Saturn, but that square to Saturn is quite brief. And once Venus is beyond that square to Saturn, for example, from the weekend, and into next week, once Venus has moved away from that square to Saturn, you're going to get a feeling of real freedom, that you can really start to do the things that you want to do. And as far as today is concerned, we have the moon moving into Scorpio as well. So you've got moon in Scorpio making a trine to Venus in Cancer, and of course that is having a sort of grand trine relationship, because that all sort of ties up with Pisces, which is your sign. So Moon and Venus are going to be trine each other, and they're going to be trine Pisces. So things are starting to move, and you Pisces can probably afford to be braver. Recently there have been times when you have been cautious, where you've wanted to do things in your own way, and you haven't wanted to take too many risks, and you've been sort of aware that there were certain places that you had power, but there are also certain places where, as far as you were concerned, you didn't have power, and you wanted to stick to what you knew and what you trusted. But things have changed, and so you can afford to move on, and you don't have to believe that anything need hold you back. Now you could short term, okay, Venus moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Saturn, so your first impulse over the next couple of days might be to think that, oh well, you can't do this, you can't do that, because there might be, for example, financial constraints on you, but that's something quite short term. I think you can move beyond that, and you realize that you do have freedom, and you do have a freedom to really be, creative, in whatever way you think is appropriate, and nothing should really hold you back. And if anything is holding you back, you can use your Piscean charms, or if not, a sudden display of force, but not too much force. A sudden display of force can be very effective. So Pisces, Venus moving into Cancer is something to welcome. Something really that you can welcome, and you can look forward to its after effects, and how it develops. Just don't be discouraged over the next couple of days if you feel that things appear to be stuck because of that Venus square Saturn. It's just temporary, and as you move into the weekend and into next week, things really should resolve themselves. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to consider the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 43, breakthrough. Now, no moving lines. So we're stuck with this. And so breakthrough indicates urgency, but no moving lines indicate that nothing's going to happen. Isn't that sort of line from Waiting for Godot, isn't it? Sort of, there's always that, let's go, no one moves. So it might be rather like that. And so what is breakthrough about? And so the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching just calls it breakthrough, and it does talk about danger, and we have to be very clear about this danger. And Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, is much more definite about it. He's saying it's a real danger, something you should trying to escape from, because Greg Winkup doesn't call this hexagram breakthrough. He calls it flight, and this is a situation where we need to leave before it's too late. And there's talk about the cries of the prisoners. We can hear people being taken prisoner by the enemy army, and if we're not careful, we're going to get taken prisoner as well. But the I Ching tells us we have a chance to escape. So it could be a situation that is stuck, doesn't seem to be going anywhere, but we should be trying to extricate ourselves from it. And so you might be tempted to do nothing, to just say, yeah, it could be dangerous, could be bad, but what's going on? Nothing's going on. So no need to do anything. But something is going on. And looking at the nuclear hexagram, we've got these the 5 bottom lines all unbroken. That's saying it's quite a heavy hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram underneath is hexagram number 1, which is the creative. And so the creative, there is a powerful force at work, and this powerful force may not have fully manifested itself yet, but it will, or it certainly might. And so if today you come across a situation that makes you uneasy, that feels dangerous, but you're not quite sure where it's going, it doesn't seem to be urgent because nothing is going on. If you're in that kind of situation, then perhaps you should head for the exits. While you've got the choice, you can get out of something, absolutely, and you've been warned. And there's not a huge amount of hurry, but you just have to start closing something down and removing yourself from the danger. So that's certainly an interpretation of this hexagram, but just a reminder, this is just a hexagram for one day, and you might say, well, there are no moving lines, so perhaps it doesn't really mean much. So but it's up to you to judge the situation. And now it's time to look at Venus moving into Cancer. And so here's a chart of the precise moment when Venus moves into Cancer. So it takes place today, July the 31st, which is a Thursday, at 4:57 a.m. London time. And so that's a precise moment where Venus is at 0 degrees Cancer. And it is an important point, not just because Venus is changing sign, it's also because Venus is on the Aries point. So the Aries point, it is the world point where there is a chance to relate to the world at large. Venus is also the planet of women, and so maybe with Venus on, okay, it's not okay. Venus is square the Aries point. I mean, theoretically, to be precise, it's on the solstice point, and so that could be women becoming prominent. That's an interpretation of Venus. Venus conjunct the Aries point. Though we should say that this is not an unusual event. Venus will be conjunct or square the Aries point, every 3 months. So it's not so unusual. But right now, when Venus is here, that do look at sort of women in the news, and if we want to be popular and to tell everyone how wonderful we are, then with Venus moving into Cancer, we can do it. Regardless of our gender, regardless of our situation, we can present ourselves in such a way that that gets noticed. And so it's not just about Venus moving into Cancer. I could say the same thing about Venus moving into Aries, or Venus moving into Libra or Capricorn. So that's one thing about it. But with Venus moving into Cancer, we are talking about Venus moving from an air sign into a water sign. So Venus is a planet that it's a feminine planet. It's quite a passive planet. It's more about sort of yin rather than yang, and so when it moves from Gemini into Cancer, you'd think that it's in a better position. Venus in Gemini, it's very interesting, Venus being in Gemini, but there's a certain mismatch. Venus, a feminine planet, being in a masculine sign, it's too much variety, too much perhaps instability and inconstancy for Venus in Gemini. But Venus in Cancer, it's more in its own element. And the first 10 degrees of Cancer, Venus is in its face, so that's sort of a minor dignity. So that helps. And so you think of Venus in Cancer as being emotional and sensitive and perhaps warm and friendly, and it's maybe lucky as well. Though your Venus in Cancer perhaps has some disadvantages. Maybe it's too much of a good thing. Venus is, it's an emotional sign. Sorry, it's an emotional planet, and it moves into Cancer, and so it's just more of the same. And one one thing you could say about Venus in Cancer is, I always like to use, this phrase of maudling sentimentality to talk about Venus in Cancer. That Venus in Cancer can be over sentimental, and it might not always, reveal its feelings, but they are there. And so the question is, does it sort of hide its feelings? Does it hide its sentimentality, or does it just let it all hang out? And so it kind of depends on the situation. Now, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily particularly useful to look at Venus in Cancer and make predictions about specific countries in the world. But one thing I do notice about this chart, because I've said it for Westminster, and the seat of government in London, and what's kind of interesting is that this chart set for Westminster, this is a precise moment where Venus moves into Cancer, is you've got 2 degrees 28 rising. You've got Pluto exactly on the descendant. And what's the big deal about 2 degrees 28 Leo? Well, what's the big deal about that is that we had a new moon on July the 24th, just over a week ago, at 2 degrees 8 Leo. So this moment where Venus moves into Cancer, moves into Cancer. That moment set for London is when the new moon comes up on the ascendant, and what does colour this Venus moving into Cancer? Not just from a perspective of the UK, but for everywhere, is the fact that Venus, as it moves into Cancer, is making a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. So that complicates the whole thing. So we shouldn't necessarily regard Venus in Cancer as a good thing because of that square to Saturn and Neptune. I don't want to go into any detail about that. I'll probably cover it tomorrow. So as far as what does it mean to have Venus in Cancer? I've got Venus in Cancer. Here's my chart. I'll show you my Venus in Cancer. Here it is. So here is my Venus in Cancer. There it is, 8 degrees Cancer, 8 degrees 24 on sort of May the 30th, 1962. And my Venus, in theory, is really strong because it's it's in the first 10 degrees of Cancer. It's got face, and it's in mutual reception with Jupiter by exaltation. I've got a grand trine, Jupiter, Neptune, Venus, and my Venus is relatively close to the IC. Well, I've never really felt too comfortable with my Venus. The sentimentality of Venus. Am I sentimental? Yeah, I actually am quite sentimental, but I don't really reveal it. I'm quite ashamed to be sentimental, to be honest, and I try to keep that private as far as I can. But when looking at my chart, I do have Mars rising. Mars rising does short circuit my chart. Mars and Taurus rising, so all the stuff about Venus in Cancer that you might normally associate with it gets short circuited because that Mars and its detriment is a real negative, and it makes me uncomfortable with other people. I'm not really someone who really enjoys. Not just enjoy it, I'm incapable of really showing my feelings, really. I'm quite, it's not what I'm certainly an emotional person, but we all are. But with my Venus trine Jupiter, it can be quite lazy, Venus trine Jupiter. I'm not saying I am lazy, but certainly there are moments of just being lost in my own thoughts and feelings and just get carried away. That can be Venus trine Jupiter, and once I start thinking about something, it just goes on and on. And of course, if you are into Chiron, you can throw Chiron into that as well. So there are a few words about my Venus. I don't really want to go on about it. because there are more interesting people to talk about. And I kind of wanted to start with sort of history. So Robert the Bruce had Venus in Cancer. Why Robert the Bruce? Why is that relevant? I mean, I like to look at Robert the Bruce's chart, not what I know much about him, because it just does so reflect the idea that Scotland is a Cancerian country. And if you look at some, William Lilly's Christian Astrology, Scotland is seen as being ruled by Cancer, coming under the remit of Cancer. And when you think about Cancer, you think about clans and the clannishness of not just of Scottish history, but I think of current Scottish politics as well. I mean, I think that Scottish politics is really intense and clannish, and English politics is probably pretty simple by comparison. I think Scottish history is pretty complicated. I'm afraid I've never studied Scottish history, but it is difficult and dangerous, and you can see how Cancer is working. And you think of things like the Glencoe massacre, was it the Campbells and the MacDonalds, and was it the Campbells massacred the MacDonalds? It's a very sort of that's perhaps a reminder of the Cancerian nature of Cancer and the viciousness of Cancer, perhaps as well in terms of Scottish history. But Robert the Bruce had the Sun in Cancer. Of course, Robert the Bruce, by the way, is Scotland's biggest hero. He defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and in the 14th century, and so he had the Sun and Venus in Cancer, and Mars in Cancer, and the North Node in Cancer. So it's so fitting that a Scottish hero has all those planets in Cancer. And the Battle of Bannockburn took place on, I think, in 1314. I don't know whether that is the right date. Maybe the program adjusted it for one reason or another, but it was the summer of 1314. And so there is Venus. Venus had just gone into Cancer at the Battle of Bannockburn, and the Sun was in Cancer, and Jupiter was in Cancer. So that really does remind us of how strong that connection is between Scotland and the sign Cancer. And by the way, of course, talking about Robert the Bruce, the legend of Robert the Bruce, when he was on the run from the English, that he got, according to the legend, I don't think it's true, but he got inspiration from a spider which was constantly trying to make its web, and it had to keep trying until it got there. And so I always associate spiders with the sign Cancer. Spiders, they make their web and they just stay in their web, and they don't want to move around, but they just wait for their prey to sort of come in. And so I think that spiders are completely Cancerian animals. So that perhaps is Venus in Cancer in a positive sense. But then one of the people on the thumbnails is Caligula. Caligula had Venus in Cancer. So Caligula, Roman emperor, he wasn't on the throne for very long. He was, by all accounts, a psychopath, and I get confused. I think it was him who made his horse a consul, or was it Nero? I think it was him who made his horse a consul, and he got sick. I mean, the beginning of his reign was fine, and then he got sick. After he recovered, he was a nightmare, and he, according to the story, while he was sick, he heard all these senators were saying, "Oh, if only Caligula would die, would recover, I'd give my own life for it." And sort of Caligula was sort of listening, and then as soon as he recovered, he insisted that these senators, honoured their promise and killed themselves to celebrate the fact that he was alive. And he was, of course, killed. Him and his wife and daughter were killed by the Praetorian Guard, and then then Claudius took over. So he had Venus in Cancer, And so this is perhaps a reminder that having Venus in Cancer is not always great. I mean, he had, we don't know, I don't know what time he was born, but he had Moon and Venus in Cancer. He had Venus square Pluto. So Venus in Cancer certainly can be emotional, but just because you've got emotions doesn't mean that it always works well. And his Venus at 20 degrees Cancer, may also link to the sort of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, because Julius Caesar had Venus in Cancer, so very close to Caligula's Venus. I mean, we don't know for sure that Julius Caesar was born on this date, but I think this is the date that is most likely for Julius Caesar. And so Julius Caesar, clearly Venus conjunct, in this case, his Venus probably worked quite well. Venus conjunct Mercury, someone who was very talented, very communicative, who did so much stuff when you think about the calendar and laying the foundations for the Roman Empire. I mean, of course, he destroyed the Republic in the process, which wasn't necessarily such a good thing. But Venus in Cancer is maybe someone who is rather concerned about himself. And sort of Julius Caesar had Venus in Cancer opposition Saturn in Capricorn. So Venus, Saturn, he wants to be in control. And it's not enough for him to win his wars and just go into retirement. He has to... maybe with his Venus in Cancer, if you were looking at it from his perspective, he would say that, he was perhaps loyal to his own troops. And, one of his concerns, when he came back from the Gallic campaigns was, his troops making sure they had land. And the Senate and the Roman authorities might be saying, well, okay, good job. But what about the veterans? So you think about the veterans issue. We talk about the Americans going on and on about veterans issues, but it may have been a veterans issue here for Julius Caesar. He had to think about his troops and making sure that they were adequately compensated for their efforts and what they'd done. And maybe that Venus in Cancer represented the loyalty he'd felt. And of course, with Venus in Cancer, when you think of his assassination, whatever he said to Brutus, was it et tu Brutus, or was it Kaisu Teknon? If someone said he was speaking Greek, so he would have said "and you, child." Of course, in the Carry On films, it was infamy. They've all got it, infamy. But if he's, you can see that disappointment at his moment of assassination with Venus in Cancer, saying, "You, Brutus, as well." That must have felt an incredible betrayal at the moment he died, that Venus in Cancer might feel. And moving on into the modern era, well, Barack Obama has Venus in Cancer. So here's Barack Obama's horoscope. Barack Obama is about to have his Venus return, and so how do we understand that Venus in Cancer? It's not immediately obvious, but that Venus in Cancer is having to do a lot of work, because that Venus in Cancer is his only planet in water signs, and Venus in Cancer could be loyal to his people, maybe. I mean, whoever those people are, the loyalties he forms in Washington. And Venus in Cancer also gives him the kind of basic sensitivity he needs if he wants to, be president of the United States. He's able to connect well enough. Although I think that, in Barack Obama's chart, his Sun Mercury in Leo, that Sun Mercury in Leo, when you've got stuff around the descendant, that's perhaps a reminder that he was able to sort of get into power through certain other people's assistance. That's that seventh house feel. So even if someone is powerful, they do they are able to sort of reach the heights. People who are born around sunset, they often have to rely very heavily on other people working for them, and they just got that knack. And so Venus in Cancer may not make a huge amount of sense, but without that Venus in Cancer, would he have been able to achieve everything he achieved? Would he have had the sufficient sensitivity? And the answer is probably not. Also, I'm sure Venus in Cancer says a lot about his private life, but I mean, I don't really know a great deal about that. And Venus in Cancer, it's quite possible that Venus in Cancer works differently in male and female charts. So with Venus in Cancer, Barack Obama's Venus in Cancer, he may be projecting that onto his wife. And I know that him and his wife are having quite a few disagreements recently. But Venus in Cancer might represent a woman he marries or gets involved with, or represents the other women in his life, but it could say something about his wife's willfulness, her stubbornness, and the fact that she's not someone to mess with, and that could be how Venus in Cancer works. Now, a woman who has Venus in Cancer is Jill Biden, and so Jill Biden has her Venus at 26 Cancer. So that's very much her. I mean, she might seem to be, a Gemini. Well, she is a Gemini. She's got the moon in Gemini. She's got Mars in Gemini, Sun in Gemini. She's got a load of planets in Gemini. But yeah, she does have Venus. She does have Venus in Cancer, and Venus in Cancer can be very loyal, and she's certainly loyal to her husband, but perhaps in a way that she kind of took things too far, pushing for him to go for a second term. At least that's what people are saying, even though it was not really in his own best interest, certainly not in the Democrat Party's own best interest. But she has that loyalty, and as soon as Venus in Cancer sort of is under pressure, Venus in Cancer feels it has to do something. It has to look after itself, and it has to look after its own interests. And Venus in Cancer, I mean, is it about the country? Being loyal to one's country, being obsessively loyal to one's country? I noticed that neocon Lindsey Graham, who really wants to go to war with everyone, particularly wants to go to war with Russia, he has got Venus in Cancer. He's coming up to his Venus return, and so he's look at his Venus. He's got Venus opposition true black moon Lilith. I mean, that's quite an unpleasant Venus because of that proximity to true black moon Lilith. There is a sort of a darkness there, and one does wonder what his priority is. I mean, he might just have contaminated views about his own country with the Sun and Venus, and with 4 planets in Cancer. He cannot let go of something, and that can be how it all works. And we shouldn't forget that I think the USA has Venus in Cancer, but I don't want to talk about the national chart here. And someone who was recently involved in American politics, who is now faded, is Liz Cheney. Again, 3 planets in Cancer. Cancer can be quite an unforgiving combination, and you can see her resentment against Trump. She firstly sort of broke ranks with fellow Republicans and whatever, supported the inquiry into the January the 6th, and then she went over to the Democrats and supported Kamala Harris. And so you can see the burning resentment of those Cancer planets, and she had she felt that Trump had let her down, and she wasn't going to let it go, and she was, you could say, loyal to her father, and it's all very family based, and it could potentially be quite messy. And finally, there's Donald Trump. It's often forgotten that Donald Trump has Venus in Cancer. One likes to focus on the fact that he's got Leo rising, and he's got Mars in Leo, and he's a Gemini. That's what makes most sense for us. But then we have to remember, he's got Venus in Cancer. He's got Venus conjunct Saturn in Cancer, and it really represents a side to him that we don't talk about, we don't see, but it probably helps us understand him. I mean, Venus in Cancer is, you could say, it's quite family orientated, almost in a sort of a parody kind of way. I mean, look at Trump and his family. I mean, he and how he sort of supports his family's interests, and his family are completely entwined with his presidency. His children and his son-in-law and his daughter. They're all around him, and it almost at times feels like a family operation and looking after his family's best interests. And you think about all of the his family and their involvement in cryptocurrency and various schemes and perhaps scams, and so Cancer can be about the accumulation of wealth, the accumulation of money. Cancer is a hoarding sign. I mean, that is one aspect of it. And so Venus might be a sort of bit out of control here. So that's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, he's got 3 planets in water signs. And he's probably a lot more sensitive than people give him credit for. I mean, sensitive as in picking up on what's going on in his country. And let's not forget, America does have a Venus Jupiter. I think a Venus Jupiter. America is a Cancerian country. It's got the Sun in Cancer. It's got Venus in Cancer. It's got Jupiter in Cancer. So it perhaps makes sense that Trump has got all these planets in Cancer, and perhaps he's able to be, through that Venus in Cancer, he's sort of in tune with the mood in this country, in his country. At times, it's not always perfect. I think he misjudged with the Epstein thing. I mean, his base were really concerned about that. And loyalty, Venus in Cancer is about loyalty. So where is people are loyal to him? Is he loyal to other people? I'm not entirely convinced about that. I mean, to what extent does he show loyalty? And Venus in Cancer, when you link it with his Mars in Leo, Venus in Cancer can be quite easy to offend. And he's got Mars in Leo and Leo rising, and Mars in Leo is quite sort of proud. And so Venus in Cancer is possibly easy to offend, and he doesn't forgive easily. Once he's slighted, the way he sort of wants to get people. Where is that desire for revenge? I think it might come from some of his Cancer planets. He remembers how he was treated. When he was in the wilderness after he lost the 2020 election, and so it's now time for payback. And so you think about Cancer, and you can sort of make associations between the mafia and Sicily, and that maybe Sicily, maybe Italy. I don't think Italy is a Cancer. Is it? I mean, I say you might say there's something very Cancerian about the mafia, and wanting payback, and the importance of loyalty. But the question is, how loyal is he prepared to be? And you think about also what's going on with Russia. Putin has dishonored him by refusing to have a ceasefire. So he says he wants He wants to pay, he wants to get back at Putin. Will he succeed? I shouldn't think so. But with Trump, with those planets in Cancer, because they're not so obvious, this may indicate that Trump is someone who is quite emotional, more emotional than people give him credit. And because he's got these darker emotions which are not always maintained, remember Venus conjunct Saturn. I've got Venus conjunct Saturn. Venus in Cancer, you could say, well, he might be projecting that Venus represents the women in his life, and conjunct Saturn, sometimes he doesn't always treat them very well. For example, him having an affair with Stormy Daniels, just after Melania had given birth. I mean, that's not great. And so Venus conjunct Saturn, could represent an icy woman. Melania gives the impression sometimes of being rather icy, doesn't she? So, in understanding Trump, I do think about his Venus in Cancer. I do think it does matter. So that's it. Those are some thoughts about Venus in Cancer. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.